I'm going to be honest, this is why some of the other riders and fans don't like Marc Marquez so much. Well, welcome into the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast. Here we go once again after a crazy weekend in Austin, Texas at the Grand Prix of the Americas. We have a lot to talk about here today. We're going to talk about, of course, the crazy start. Should there have been penalties? Should there not have? We're going to talk about things the stewards and the race direction actually got right as well. We're not going to just take the piss out of them, as the British say. And then we're going to talk about a few riders that need a little bit of, congratulations for the job they're doing so far. All that and more right ahead, but let's get into it. First of all, the race start in Austin. If you haven't seen it by now, you're living under a MotoGP rock. You need to go educate yourself because it was wild. Marc Marquez leaving the grid with 3 minutes left to go before the race start. Threw the entire thing into chaos. 10 other riders leave the grid. I mean, it was 9 other riders total, 10 including him. They throw the red flag, they restart. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, was the chaos calculated by Marc Marquez? 100%. If you haven't seen it already, we have now video and audio of him talking to his crew chief before the race. He absolutely knew what he was doing. He knew the rules down to the letter. He knew that if he left, he could just hop on his other bike, go out for the warm-up lap, and then end up starting at the back of the grid. And worst case scenario, which is kind of what happened, is that 9 other riders, 10 other riders would leave the grid with him and would force a red flag, and they would restart the entire thing, no harm, no foul. Now, a few of the other teams did cry foul, mainly the teams that felt like they had made the correct tire choice on the grid, namely Trackhouse. We heard from Davide Brivio. I can't say that very well. Davide Brivio, we heard from him right away saying, I don't understand why these other teams shouldn't be getting penalties for what's going on. They left the grid. We came to the grid. We took the gamble. We were going to send Ayagura out there on slicks, which would have been the right call. Why are we now getting penalized with a restart? We made the right call. They didn't. And now they get a do-over, basically. And he didn't think that was right. And I think he has a little bit of a point. Now, if we want to go back and look at the rules and look at the letter of the rule, I know the Marc Marquez fans are already saying this. Marc was right. Marc knew what he was doing when it came to the rules and what it said. If he could go back, like, he can't change tires on the grid at that point. 3 minutes left, you can no longer change tires. He knew that. That was going to cost him a ride-through penalty. But if he just scrapped this bike, said to hell with it, ran back, got the bike with slicks, the dry setup bike, went out on the warm-up lap at the end, that he could join the race at the end of the grid, starting dead last, but he would be on the right tires. So when everyone else went to pit, he would just take over the lead. Sounds smart. Probably would have worked, but there is a little bit of a factor of those 3 riders, Bastianini, Binder, and Agura, who did opt for the slick tire, who did go out there on the correct tire first. Marc would have had to been all the way at the opposite end of the grid from them, right? Like, they should have been technically starting on the front row. They wouldn't have had to pit for a different bike. They were on the right bike already. They should have gotten an advantage for guessing or strategizing or whatever you want to say, for doing it right. They got it right the first time. They didn't need the do-over. And unfortunately, everyone got the do-over. So unfortunately for those riders, they get stuck in their normal grid positions, which, again, for Binder and Bastianini and Ayagura, it wasn't that great. And we carry on with the race. So I heard a lot of people talk about this, and it was unfair. And it's a lot for race direction to sort out at the beginning of a race, saying, all right, we're going to try to figure out exactly right now, in the moment, what's the best thing to do. So I want to take it kind of step by step. First of all, we've covered off, did Marc Marquez, was this a calculated move? Absolutely. No questions. Please, no one at this point should be arguing that he didn't know exactly what he was doing, standing off his bike and then dead sprinting off the grid. He knew one way or another it was going to work out in his favor. Now, the second thing, was race direction correct in red flagging the start of the race? I think also yes. It feels like you had people running off the grid in every direction. You had the teams clearing the grid. You had Maverick Vinales running around without a bike. I don't think you could have just started this race by the clock and everything been okay. Also, the riders that stayed out there, they would even be a little iffy of, wait, now do I go back to my original grid position? Do I move up? Do I move back? Like, what am I supposed to do? And in the moment, I don't think a lot of that can be communicated. I mean, remember, these guys don't have radio communication like Formula One. The team can't just go, okay, guys, when you come around, take the third position on the grid, take the second position on the grid. No, you're at pole now, Luca Marini. They can't do that. And so I don't think race direction had much of a choice into red flag the race. Now, what I heard afterwards of saying, well, the act of red flagging the race kind of gives us all right, we're going to drop that. That race never happened. That's how it works. And then we're starting a brand new race. That kind of wipes out the idea of anyone like Marc or Pecco or Alex Marquez, anyone else that left the grid, of sustaining a penalty during the race, a ride through, a long lap, whatever it is. They're not going to get penalized now because in a sense, we're starting a brand new race over and no laps have been completed. So we're not going to jumble up grid position based on where everyone was on the track or awarding half points. None of that stuff applies, right? We're at the very beginning of the race. That's where I take a little bit of an issue. Because if a rider makes a penalty in practice or qualifying, that penalty can carry over to the race. And so why a pre-grid, a grid pre-race penalty can't then follow over to the main race, even if it is a restarted red flag race, I don't quite see the logic there. Let me just pose a question to you. A rider gets a long lap penalty because of something he did in qualifying. Let's just say long lap penalty is going to happen for him in the race. They go out on the race. He gets the bubble up on his screen and says, all right, serve your long lap penalty. But he's yet to do it when that race is red flagged. So now when they restart the race, does his long lap penalty that was coming from qualifying or practice now just vanish because we're starting a new race? Or should he still have to serve that penalty? It feels like they could have still levied penalties to these riders who left the grid. But again, that's not what the rule book says. If we want to say letter to the law rule book, I think all in all, race direction probably did the right thing, as according to the rule book. In my opinion, they did not do the right thing according to fairness. Because like I said, we had 3 teams on the grid who took the gamble. They went with the right choice. They were looking at the conditions when they went out. Everyone got to see the track. Everyone got to see the siding lap. Fabio Quartararo got to crash on the siding lap. Everyone knew the conditions they were going into, and they were seeing that the rain was stopping. 3 teams decided, we're going to go on the slick. We're going to take the advantage. And they would have had a hell of an advantage if they would have started the race like that. All the other teams would have had to pit, would have put them half a lap ahead. It would have been a very, very different race and maybe a much more exciting race. But we got robbed of that opportunity. And those teams that did do it right, I think it was a little bit unfair to let everyone else say, well, we can switch now. Now, no harm, no foul. Let's just go back out there and do it all over again. Like, this sport is about decisions made in a millisecond. And that's hard to keep up with, right? When you're race direction, you're trying to sort all that out. Decisions made in a millisecond are very, very difficult to kind of pick out and weed out. But I think in this case, we had teams that in that millisecond, sitting on the grid, made the right call. Made the call that everyone eventually went with. They just did it sooner. And they didn't get any benefit from that. Which I think is a little unfortunate for these teams, that it would have been fun to see the grid kind of start out of order and to see Marc and Pecco and Alex have to fight through some of those slower riders. It would have really turned the entire race upside down. We would have had Bagnaia, Marquez, and Marquez fighting probably for 15th on the grid at some point during that race, rather than fighting for the podium, and then all 3 of them trying to fight forward. And we would have had Ayogura and Bastianini and Binder out front leading a Grand Prix, fighting for a victory in a very tricky, wet track. Very, very different story than what we got. Do I think they need to do something going forward to prevent this sort of thing from happening again? I think yes. Not just because it's chaos and it caused chaos. It's also a little bit of a dopey start to a Grand Prix. I saw a video today that was like, just remember, this is somebody's first MotoGP race they've ever watched. And they're tuning in for the first time watching that happen. Which, is that the best face MotoGP can put forward? Not exactly. Do I think it's an embarrassment to end all embarrassments? No, let's keep that in check. It's not embarrassment of the worst kind. Sports have gaffes. I mean, they make entire video compilations of sports making gaffes. It's how it works. But I do think going forward, the rules need to be tweaked so that a rider like Marc can't take advantage of the rules this extremely and throw the entire grid into chaos. If I was race direction, I was going down, I would go to each team and say, hey, you have to leave for this quick start procedure with the bike you were on the grid with last. So if you were on the wet bike on the grid when you left the grid, that's the bike you have to leave the garage with. Now, after the sighting lap, we all do one sighting lap. If you don't want to go to the grid for the quick start procedure and you want to instead go from pit lane and get your new bike and get that slick tire bike, then you can go out on the warm-up lap from pit lane and start from the back of the grid, which is what should have happened to Marc to begin with, right? So that way you would have everyone leaving their garage with the same setup they were on the grid with 10 minutes ago. So I, Brad, and Anea would all go out on that dry setup bike, and everyone else would have had to go out on their wet setup bike. Whether you go to the grid with that or not for the warm-up lap, that's your choice. You can go into the garage and get your other bike and start the warm-up lap from pit lane and have to round up at the end of the grid, or keep your wet bike all the way to the quick start procedure on the grid, and then we start the race that way. And then you'd have to pit for your dry bike at some point. But at least that way, it just echoes a little more fairness. Yes, it's not letter to the law. It's me making up rules on the fly of procedures, but it really would have made those riders who made the right choice initially have some benefit from it, and the riders that kind of skirted the rules have a tiny, tiny little setback or penalty from it. Not an official penalty, no ride-throughs, no long laps, anything like that. But I think that something needed to be done in that moment to make sure that the race was still fair for those who had the equal shake. Everyone has the equal opportunity to do the right call on the grid. And I think Marc consciously, pretty early on, knew he was going to go with the slick bike. He just didn't want to give his competitors that heads up by changing his tires on the grid while they still had time to change the tires or still had time to set up the bike. So it was a little bit of a fluff. Like I said, not the best looking MotoGP. Not the end of the world either, but not really something we want to see on a Sunday. The race otherwise was fairly entertaining. We had a lot of battles mid-pack. We had Marc crashing, we had Pecco winning, Alex Marquez still on fire. So overall, a pretty good American GP, but the start was wild. I've never seen them cut away from their opening title sequence to be like, this just in, the grid has gone nuts. A little bit of fun to watch. So let's go from that to something that I think race direction and the MotoGP stewards actually got really right this weekend, and that was Fabio Di Giannantonio's grid position. Now, if you were watching qualifying, he ended up qualifying second on the grid, but for a minute that lap got scrubbed off because of a yellow flag. And he was really disappointed. I think at that point he would have had to start fourth or sixth or something like that. And he was so fast in that lap, it gets canceled because of a yellow flag. Well, race direction goes back and they look at that yellow flag infringement and realize, I mean, he was committed to the turn he was turning into. He was full knee, elbow down. As the yellow flag came out, there was no chance for him to react to that yellow flag. Even if he wanted to slow down, there was not going to be a chance to slow down. So therefore, he shouldn't get penalized for it, which is a great rule that they went back and actually looked at it and said, no, there's no way we can penalize a guy for being super committed to a turn and then just seeing the turn through and improving his lap time. It's not a yellow flag infringement by letter of the law. Let's give him his second place on the grid back, which he truly deserved. It was a heck of a lap. It's good to see him up front. We forget Digia is on the same bike that Marc Marquez is on and that Pecco Bagnaia is on. He should be fighting for the front row every week. If it wasn't for this injury, maybe he would be so far. But to me, that's something the stewards really, really got right. They went back, they corrected that mistake Technically, did he go through a yellow flag? Yes. By, half a second or less, he hit that yellow flag. But there was no time for him to react, to roll off the throttle, to make it safer for that rider that was in the gravel. There's nothing he could really do to make that situation safer other than just run his lines. And that's exactly what he did. And he shouldn't get penalized for something he can't humanly react to. And so that is something I think the stewards really, really got right this weekend at the Circuit of the Americas. And we saw the results bore out. Like, he deserved to be on the front row. He was right up there fighting for the podium, in the top 5, all over the place. Him and Morbidelli kind of come together in the sprint, which we can talk about the teammate love or lack thereof in a little bit. But I think it was nice to see some common sense kind of come back into the steward's office and them realize, like, oh yeah, technically was that a yellow flag infringement? Sure, maybe. Did he deserve it? No. Again, what's letter of the rule book and what's fair? These guys are humans, and I think everyone in the steward's booth and all of us at home, we're all humans. Like, we want the human decision to be made, not just, well, according to subsection 5, paragraph 3. It's like, I get it. Poindexter, put the book away. No one wants to argue with you. You're no fun at parties. Go sit in the corner. These are human beings we're talking about, and if there was no way for him to avoid the yellow flag, then there's no way for him to make it safer for the other rider that has already crashed. So he's not putting anyone in danger by just running his pace. That's all my soapbox. I'll get off it after this. So the third thing I want to talk about is Alex Marquez, because he now leads the MotoGP World Championship on points because of his insane consistency. Second places all around. I mean, we saw Joan Mir in 2020 win a MotoGP title with second places all around. And it's because he was just finishing races, finishing there every single week. He won one race that year, wins the title because he was at the front all the time. And we're seeing that from Alex Marquez. Coda, not his best circuit, still ends up putting in a really good performance yet again, fighting with Pecco. Pecco's a little stronger this week, but I think an Alex win is probably on the cards this year. But even if it's not, I think we have to stop discounting him, saying, wow, that's a good track for Alex. That's a good week for Alex. Next week, expect him to be where we're more accustomed to seeing him, which is, 4th, 5th, 6th, just off the podium, just off the front 2 rows. No, I think we have to get used to seeing Alex Marquez on the front 2 rows. Now, why is that? We've talked about it a little bit before. We've talked about that this year's the GP25 for Ducati isn't that much different than the GP24, so he's on much more even machinery to his brother and Pecco and Digia than he was last year. So he's going to be able to fight at the sharper end than he did last year. Last year was tough for everybody on the year-old Ducati. I mean, Bez thought he was going to come in there and tear it up on that year-old Ducati. Digia did. Alex Marquez did. They all did. And none of them could really get it working. It wasn't the same bike as the step forward that the GP24 was. These two bikes are very similar. And so I just think the Alex Marquez haters have to just step aside for a second and go, we're 3 races in. He's on podiums and podiums and podiums every single week. He's qualifying well. He's practicing well. This isn't a situation where he's running around 12th or 13th on race pace and then puts in a good lap and squeaks into Q2. No, he has been there in every single session. Top 5, top 6. He is not the slowest Ducati. He is not the slowest rider on the track. He's not just Marc Marquez's goofy little brother. He's here to play. He's here to compete. He will win races this year. I do believe it. And especially if Marc decides to throw a couple races away, Alex will be there to pick up the pieces in one or more of them. So let's put some respect on Alex Marquez's name. I said this in my TikTok video earlier of, like, we can stop asking Alex what advice his brother has given him this week. We can just ask Alex about Alex and knock this little brother shit off. It's just, it's old. It's boring. We don't need to know what advice Marc gave him this week about what underwear to wear to the circuit. He's his own rider. He's coming into his own. He's racking up the podiums. He's racking up the numbers, the hardware. He's putting and keeping Gresini Ducati on the map. The smallest team on the grid is a powerhouse. Like, where was this Ducati team before the Marquez brothers, before Alex went there, before Marc went there, and Alex is continuing to be there. This team was a nowhere team on the grid. Do you remember the Advintia Reale Ducati days? Tito Rabat riding around in 8th place, or 18th place, I should say. So I'm happy for Alex keeping it rolling, and hopefully he can do it all season long. I think he can. I think people, show the man some respect. The other rider I want to show a little bit of respect, and I think he gets very little, is Jack Miller. Last year, Jack Miller was washed. Jack Miller was done. Why is anyone giving him a shot to stay in MotoGP? We should be letting Sergio Garcia and Joe Roberts and anybody else but Jack Miller come up to MotoGP. There's a few reasons why Jack is still in MotoGP. One, everyone likes him. And don't discount how much being a likable dude keeps you in your job. I bet there are some of you out there right now who have your jobs because you're nice to work with. Maybe you're not even that good at your job. I'm going to guess. You might suck at your job, but you're a nice person to hang out with. You're a nice person to be around. You're not incompetent. You can do the job. Could you do it better? Sure. But you get a pass when you're a nice person. I know people in my career who their entire shtick is just being really super nice. And are they hard to fire? Yes, they are. They are really hard to fire. Number two, it seems like Jack can still ride a MotoGP bike because look at the timing screen. He's ahead of Fabio Quartararo a lot. Now, not always when it counts, not always when the points come in or the qualifying order, but you look in practice, you look in qualifying, you look in these different sessions, and Jack Miller has been there every step of the way. He's out qualifying Alex Rins, he's out qualifying Oliveira when he's there, he's out finishing in this race Fabio Quartararo. He's competing, and it seems like he's gelling pretty good with that Yamaha over the KTM. I mean, he was 5th in the Grand Prix. Circuit of the Americas with the massive 1.2 kilometer back straight. And this dude is finishing in front of the KTMs, in front of the Aprilias, in front of his teammate. What more do you want from the guy? He also helps Fabio get his bike started when he crashed on the siding lap. Miller taxi coming through like while the clock is running, not just after a session when you run out of gas. This dude was clutch for his team this week. Possibly saves Fabio Quartararo's race on Sunday, 5th in his own right, fighting with the Ducatis left, right, and center. I think Jack Miller needs a tiny bit of respect. Now, is it all solved? No, he has to compete for his dinner every night. I think that's why he's riding the way he did. Look, do you remember Jack Miller riding for that Ducati contract? He was with Pramac. He wanted that Ducati contract. It was him and Petrucci fighting it out. And Miller was riding some of the best he's ever ridden in MotoGP and got that contract. Some riders have to be hungry. I could say the same thing about Digia, who looked to be nowhere in MotoGP until he thought it was all going to go away for him. And all of a sudden, he's on podiums, he's winning a race, he's at VR46. Someone like Jack might need the fire lit underneath him. He has a 1-year deal at Pramac Yamaha. He needs to earn his supper, and he's doing it right now. So big hats off to Jack. Huge pickup with the Miller Taxi Service for Fabio Quartararo. I think he probably owes him dinner for that one. But also big ups to Jack, just showing up to Yamaha, keeping his head down, putting in really fast laps. He's good in all the conditions. He's just got to stay upright on Sunday, score points, and yeah, I think he'll be okay. Will he ever have a factory ride again? I don't know, maybe if Rins can't get it together over there at Yamaha, they decide to move Jack up and move Rins back. Something like that could have happened, I could see, but I don't think the big-time factory rider is still in Jack's future. That ship has maybe sailed a little bit, but you never know. You start putting results together, and your future can change. And it's been kind of fun seeing Jack mix it up in the top 10, getting that Yamaha through into Q2. Both him and Fabio, fighting it out in Q2 together. Like, we are seeing progress from these Japanese manufacturers, and it's only a matter of time until they close the distance. Will it be this year? That's a long road to travel. But like I said last year, Yamaha's goal needs to be top 10s. They need to be into Q2 every single week. They need to see improvement, and it can't be a fight to get into Q2. They got to get there. They just got to get into Q2 and compete for those top positions. They can't be scraping through out of Q1 every single week. They're going to have their down weeks. They're going to have the stuff that doesn't quite work when it doesn't quite work, but they have to be in the top 10. And Yamaha, for the most part, when you're talking about Miller and Quartararo, they've done that. Which brings me to Honda. And a small question of why Johann Zarco is the one flying the Honda flag over there. Like, you've got a world champion in Joan Mir, you got Luca Marini, and you've got a rookie in Samket Chantra. I don't think any of us were expecting him to come in on the worst bike on the grid and just tear it apart. But you have Johann Zarco on one end of that spectrum that seems to qualify well, seems to race well. He's getting his elbows out on Sunday. And then you have Mir, who can't stay on the bike. And I know Mir has shown flashes this year. He's qualified okay. He's looked better. He's looked more comfortable. But the fact remains the dude has to finish a race. You can't be a factory rider without finishing a race. Dude, bring it home 15th, something. Score a point. But this guy's on the floor yet again this weekend in the sprint, in the main race. I mean, Zarco is just the only one that's really showing that the Honda is making strides. Marini is doing Marini things. He's that slow burn guy he's going to get on the bike and he's going to tinker and go incrementally faster. It's a hard way possibly to develop a bike to be at the front. And he is improving, but I don't think he's going to give you that wow factor. And here we go, Mr. 35-year-old Frenchman is going to give us our wow factor from Castrol Satellite Honda. So maybe Joan Mir and Zarco, you need to have dinner together. Zarco maybe bring a little diagram, teach Mir how the bike leans over and where the traction comes from. You know, those track day guys, they like to teach you, like, you know, how to lean the bike over and the 100 points of friction and all that. I think somebody in the chat may know what that's all about. Maybe he needs to just go through some basics again for Mir so he can realize, like, you know, finishing a race is pretty nice to do. It would be great to do more of that. I think that's going to be about all I do this week in a zany week at the America GP. I mean, if any of you were watching it, you should go rewatch it, especially the beginning, and watch all the little guys run around their leathers. It was pretty entertaining. But thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.